I'm here today to speak on Bill C-245, an act to amend the Canada Infrastructure Bank Act. And I want to thank the member from Churchill, Kanawha-Tuk-Aski, for bringing this forward. I am very proud to stand here in this House today to speak in support of it. It really looks at something that I think is fundamentally important. It takes the Canada Infrastructure Bank Act and changes it and starts to focus on things that matter. And the thing that matters most right now in this country, Madam Speaker, is addressing the realities of climate change. Now, it is on the record since 2016 that I am not in support of the infrastructure bank. I am tired of seeing public money going into supporting private infrastructure and making the wealth of those few grow while the rest of us struggle. To me, it just makes sense that we have really profound support and input put into public ownership of public infrastructure, especially as we take on this crisis of climate change. If we're going to be serious about addressing this issue, we need to look at how we're going to adapt and respond in local communities and make sure that those areas are recognized. And we don't see that happening in this country right now under the leadership of the Liberals. Madam Speaker, I come from a large rural riding, and one of the biggest challenge is transportation. For a lot of my communities, they have to take 1 or 2 ferries, drive a long distance to get to the healthcare supports that they need. And there is very little support for bus services, for looking at how we're going to get people from one place to the other place in a safe and affordable way. This continues to be a massive concern and one that this bill addresses. This bill looks at the reality that more needs to be done. And it looks at taking the priorities of the infrastructure bank and supporting communities. Last Parliament, I put forward motion 53. And that motion really talked about the fact that we're not seeing enough sustainable funding and resources going to smaller communities across the country to respond to the changes that we're seeing in the climate. We're also not seeing that funding that's going to come in, support the adaptation and mitigation of what's happening in the climate, but also address the issues of making sure that there's sustainable employment in our areas. We need to have the climate addressed with local solutions. Communities and regions know what they know, and what they know often works. It also, of course, similar to this bill, brought forward the idea of making sure that in every step we take, we acknowledge and recognize UNDRIP, and we look at following the leadership of Indigenous communities across this country. So we need to see the voice of rural and remote communities, the voices of Indigenous communities actually heard, because they are on the front lines. As we look at what's happening in our country, they are at the front lines of climate change and the impacts. Madam Speaker, I live in BC. Our region is seeing the impacts of climate change significantly. Last year, we saw heat domes that killed so many because we were not prepared for that level of heat in our region. We saw excessive and extreme flooding that wiped out whole highways and made areas inaccessible. We actually had to have the military fly in and take people who were stranded in their vehicles out because they couldn't get out because those areas were completely destroyed. And of course, we've seen forest fires that have eliminated a whole community and threatened so many more. This is the new reality that we are living in today. And that concerns me greatly because it is expensive and it is threatening to our way of life. And what is frustrating to me as well is the fact that we're not seeing from this government the level of action that we need to see. For the last 6 years, the Prime Minister has pretended to care about the climate crisis. But at the same time, his government has looked at raising subsidies of oil companies. They are higher now than they were under the Prime Minister Harper. Over $4.5 billion public money was used to buy a pipeline, and we don't even know where that's going to end. Canada has the most GHG emissions in the G7 per capita. Greenhouse gases emitted by this government have increased by 11%. and Canada is the only G7 country where GHG emissions have increased since the Paris Agreement. So much for our Prime Minister standing in that place saying, Canada is back. We are not back. We are not doing what we need to do to invest in a future that is safer for our children. And we're not investing in a future that leads us to opportunity for business and growth, because the future is dealing with the climate. We've already pushed that far. It's time for action. It's time for a vision. And this bill addresses these very important issues. We need solutions that focus on growing and sustaining the wealth of everyday Canadians, not just the top 1%. And one part that I spoke of earlier that is so pivotal to this bill is following the leadership of Indigenous communities in this country. The first people of this country need to be at every single table, and this bill assures that that is the reality. We need to be listening to those voices, we need to be listening to traditional knowledge, and we need to be accepting that there's a long history of awareness of regions all over Canada that only Indigenous voices can bring to the table. So we also have to acknowledge that when it comes to adapting to climate change, Indigenous communities are largely underfunded for basic infrastructure. I think of the Dewanu in my riding up in Kinkham, a very remote community. They have been facing immense flooding from the river for multiple years. And they've been very clear. They need an access road so they can get to the ocean, so that when the community floods, as it has, Madam Speaker, I want you to understand, they have been building their houses up every year to address the fact that their whole community is being flooded. And all they need is a road so that a boat can come get them. Right now, their only solution is to go up and stand and wait for the helicopter to land on a pad, which means they can only take a few people out at a time, which leads to higher risk. But we don't see any support in that. But that is exactly what this bill would say. We need to address these issues. So, Madam Speaker, I live, work, and serve communities that are small, that are rural, that are Indigenous. And I will tell you right now that the leaders of those communities are often working very hard with their staff to write the proposals, to do the work that needs to be done so that they can get the support that they need. Because often when they're trying to find the resources to do those key things, they don't have it, and the complex processes don't acknowledge the different sizes of communities. So this bill really does open the door for these communities to have a voice. We know that there's $35 billion in the Canadian Infrastructure Bank. This is so important because we need to start addressing these really important issues. So, Madam Speaker, I think I will end there. All I can say is this. This bill will make a difference. It will make a difference for communities trying their best to adapt to a climate that is going to win. And if we don't do action soon, we're going to see devastation, and all of us will have to take a part of that responsibility. Thank you.